Our next speaker is another University of Michigan student. Hoai Pham is a pre-public health senior in the residential college. She is majoring in social theory and practice with a focus on health disparities. Through her major, she is studying the impacts of implicit racial bias on medical professionals. She is also minoring in community social action, change, and music. As a local organizer, she is currently involved in the Stop Spencer Coalition.
I just wanted to start by thanking Michelle for inviting me to speak here, and also to my friend and local organizer, Madison Jones, who co-wrote this with me. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize the J20 defendants who on this day last year were arrested in mass numbers and heavily charged for protesting in DC. As of 2 days ago, 59 of the original 188 of those defendants are still facing charges. As we rally today, we have to remember the history of our government's mistreatment and criminalization of activists. When I was 7 years old, I wanted to play soccer with my male cousins. They thought I was joking, and we ended up fighting that day because girls don't play soccer. They learned an interesting lesson, that not only can girls play soccer, but girls can win. By the time I was 15 years old, I had learned how to move through this patriarchal society with my head down and my eyes averted, the only way I could try avoiding being catcalled by strangers who would inform me that I was a beautiful Asian girl. When I was 19 years old, I became the 1 in 5. I found out later that he only dated Asian women, and like so many others, he didn't understand that the absence of a no doesn't mean yes, Aziz Ansari. Many of these experiences will resonate with many of you, as they are unfortunately all too common among women. But for some of you, particularly the white women in the crowd, you cannot understand how the intersections of my identities work to remind me that I don't just live in a male-dominated society, but also a white one that has sexualized and fetishized me as a woman of color. It is unacceptable to ignore intersectionality and how identities of gender, sexual orientation, class, race, and ethnicity overlap. We cannot fight for women's rights until we recognize some people who hold the identity of women are more privileged than others. Today, we are in Ann Arbor, Michigan, home to many upper-class, educated, cis-het white women who will never experience the layers of oppression that women of color face, oftentimes at the hands of white women who will not stand up for them. I myself, as a non-black, cis-het woman from Ann Arbor, have many identities that allow me to move and exist in spaces that are not accessible to other women. In our fight to end sexual assault and rape culture, we must understand that marginalized women have historically been silenced and ignored, despite being attacked at much higher rates. We must acknowledge this country's long and terrible history of sexually exploiting black women, a history that white women continue to be complicit in. Our fight for women must include a fight for black lives and against police brutality. Our fight for women must recognize that black women, especially LGBTQ black women, have largely been shut out of the movement that they started, Rose McGowan. And our fight for white women needs to be inclusive to our trans sisters who do not have pussies to grab back, yet who are resisting through their existence. As we proclaim that nevertheless she persisted, we have to realize that she, marginalized women, have been persisting since the enslavement of her people, since the denial of her right to go to the bathroom safely, since 53% of white women who should have been her allies voted for Donald Trump in 2016. If we want to stand with our LGBTQ community when they take a stand against pussy hats because those hats propagate the idea of femininity solely tied to reproductive parts, then we should take them off. If we're not taking every single inclusive measure to fight the patriarchy, then we can end up contributing to it. Last year, Linda Sarsour called for others to follow the women of color. And while the burden of fighting for their oppressions should not be put on the shoulders of the oppressed, we must remember to listen to the women of color. We must stop stereotyping marginalized women as being negative when they choose to use their labor to speak up. Because simply relaying their lived experiences tells the stories of centuries of systemic oppressions that our denial writes off as them being irrationally angry when they have every right to be. How can we make this movement more inclusive? The Women's March has turned up massive numbers of white women. And if a movement that is supposed to fight for everyone leaves out its most disenfranchised members, it is not on the marginalized to show up and cater to us. We must self-reflect to acknowledge the ways in which we haven't been as inclusive, and then take active steps to change that. Some of the other speakers here today have spoken to the successes of the Women's March, of which there are many. The people here today have the power and energy to make real social change. And if we choose to use our privileges and our various intersectional identities to uplift and empower every single woman, then we can finally start to make America great for the first time. Thank you.